Sheila Reddy from the Nature Conservancy, where I'm Global Director and Lead Scientist for Conservation Impact. And I'm hosting this seminar series together with Rachel Martin and Elias Cisneros. This is the first Tuesday of every month. And the purpose of this seminar is to advance the aim of the Impact Evaluation Working Group. And that is essentially to advance evidence-based biodiversity conservation by supporting the adoption of counterfactual approaches to understanding the impacts of conservation actions and interventions. So hopefully a lot of you are already familiar with the working group and the seminar series, but if you're not, please check out additional information on the Conservation Biology webpage. And you can also follow us on X or sign up for our email list. So we've had a great lineup, and that's going to continue today. So our last seminar was with Rachel Newgarten, the Executive Director for Conservation Planning at Wildlife Conservation Society. That was titled PhD to Practitioner, Practical Approaches to Impact Evaluation, Lessons from Madagascar and Beyond. And if you didn't have a chance to see that, the recording is available on our Vimeo and YouTube channels. And today we're going to do something a little different to end out the calendar year. I'm really excited about what we have on the lineup today. So it's a panel highlighting some content that's going to be part of a special issue called Bridging the Impact Evaluation Research Practice Gap in Conservation. And this is in the journal Conservation Science and Practice. As a reminder, we won't have a seminar in January, but we'll resume again in February. And the Zoom calendar invites are up to date and should remind you of when we're starting again. So let me do some housekeeping before we get into things. As usual, we'll have speakers followed by a moderated question and answer session. And you can post your questions in the chat. And Elias will moderate the question and answer session by reading out the questions. If it's helpful to you, please also use the live transcription function under More Live Transcript. And as I mentioned before, all of the seminars are recorded, so please check them out on Vimeo or our YouTube channel. I've heard of folks going back to these and watching them and really enjoying being able to catch up on that content, even if you can't be here the first Tuesday of every month. And please also use our hashtag Tuesdays with Team Counterfactual and tag #IDoImpact if you're going to post on social media. Okay, with that, let me formally introduce the topic for today. So again, this is an opportunity to get a preview of the content in this special issue that's addressing a really important topic, and that is bridging the impact evaluation research and practice gap. And as someone in a practitioner organization, the Nature Conservancy, this is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart and my day-to-day work. So we're really lucky to hear from 4 different folks about their perspective in this space. And I'm very grateful to Tanya O'Gara, who's our senior guest editor for this special issue. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Tanya to give you an introduction to the special issue.
Thank you so much, Sheila. I'm just going to share my screen and, oops, there I am. And can you see my screen?
Yes, looks good, Tanya. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So thank you so much for this nice introduction. Just a little bit of background or introduction to myself. I'm based in Singapore at the National University of Singapore. I'm chair of the Impact Evaluation Working Group. And just to flesh out the story behind this special issue, it was born during ICCB, the International Conservation Biology Congress in 2022 in Rwanda, and it built on a symposium and a roundtable that were hosted by the Impact Evaluation Working Group on this very topic, which was essentially how do we bridge this impact evaluation research practice gap in conservation. And what we found during this Congress was that there was huge appetite for this topic and a lot of interest among practitioners for understanding how could they start utilizing counterfactual methods and impact evaluation methods in their practice. And so together with some of the presenters from the symposium and people in the roundtable, we decided to put together a special issue. So we presented this idea to the chief editor-in-chief at Conservation Science and Practice, and she was incredibly enthusiastic. So here we are. And this is really a pre-launch. It's not yet public or published, but hopefully soon. And the basic idea behind this special issue is to equip practitioners with actionable insights into how to integrate impact evaluation into practice. And I'm sure we're all, we all know why we need to bridge this gap, but just to fill us all in so that we're all on the same page, that the overarching reason really is because we need to understand what works in conservation. Billions of dollars are spent annually on conservation programs and projects, and yet the decisions underpinning many of these conservation projects are rarely underpinned by causal evidence. And this is where counterfactual methods can help. They can take us a long way towards revealing what works causally. And so ultimately our goal is to learn, did this work, did this not work, and so on. Now, over the past decade, there's been a rapid increase in the number of counterfactual impact evaluations of conservation interventions, so mostly applied to protected areas, payments for ecosystem services, some community-based management, quite a few sustainable certification programs. But we have a long way to go, and they're not fully integrated into practice. So a lot of this research is being conducted by researchers at universities, even though there are now more and more collaborations across universities and organizations. But there is an appetite for more. And this is where we're coming in with a special issue. The ultimate goal here is healthy people and planet. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I'd rather spend more time with our presenters, but I will spend a little bit of time on this slide. This is our list of 13 papers, and they're not in any precise order, but they kind of reflect these three main themes or classifications. So there's some lessons learned papers, so broad overviews of lessons derived from trying to integrate impact evaluation successfully or less successfully into practice. A number of how-to papers. So this covers case studies, reviews, perspectives. It's a broader category, but through these types of format is a guide to how do we do it, how did we do it, and how can it be done. And then finally are the more, in a sense, methodological papers about how do we move forwards and what do we do when we have challenging data poor situations. And those kind of reflect the order in which you see the papers here listed here. Some of them, if there's any authors in the audience, you'll see I've shortened some of your titles just because I wanted to acknowledge everyone here on this slide, and it became much too big. But we're lucky enough to have 4 of the papers being presented today, 4 of these presenters here today. We would have loved to have everyone, but we don't have the time. But you will be able to read their papers soon. So what do we mean by soon? Before I actually talk about that, I do want to say that this wouldn't have been possible without my co-editors. And these are Joanna Eklund, Rachel Newgarten, and Edwin Pinagar. So we've all pulled together to help, I think, produce what will be a really valuable special issue. Expected publication date, I've said March 2025. I'm not sure, but that would be really good. And it would come before the next ICCB Congress in Brisbane. So a good opportunity to then talk about it there and to promote it there. And I did want to give final special thanks to Carolina Murcia, who is the editor-in-chief of Conservation Science and Practice, who's been really supportive and helpful the whole way. So I'm going to pass you on to our first speaker, and that would be Monique.
Let's see if we can make this work. Can I get some thumbs up? Yeah, yeah.
Looking good.
Yeah, good. So hopefully you can all hear me and see my slides. So wonderful. So I'll try to make the most of my 5 minutes. So my name is Diogo Veríssimo. I'm a research fellow here at the University of Oxford, and today I'll be talking to you about measuring impact of digital conservation campaigns using culturomics. So in essence, using large online data sets. So, really, in many cases, many organizations put a lot of effort in their conservation campaigns. And I think that's, probably a good idea, given that, my view at least, is that conservation is largely an exercise in human persuasion. At the same time, internet is increasingly used by conservationists to communicate, because, of course, it's easy to scale messaging. It's easy to reach a variety of diverse audiences through it. But yeah, often, we focus a lot on our sort of smart, creative, interesting sort of visuals that we use for these campaigns. We don't go further and ask what difference do they make, right? And I think that's really what we want to get to with this. And of course, at the same time, we have another stream of work, that of conservation culturomics, for which there's also a working group in the Society for Conservation Biology, that's all about really using these online digital data sets to better understand people's relationship with nature, right? So in this particular piece of work, in this particular paper, we use the synthetic counterfactual, or the synthetic control method. And really the idea here is that you combine a series of control units and you use some weights to build what is as close as possible, replica of your treatment unit before the intervention, very much like you see in the picture. And then you use the same weightings to then understand what would happen after the intervention, right? So in essence, you're creating I guess the clue is in the name, a synthetic version of your treated units, with the hope of then calculating the counterfactual, right? What would have happened in the absence of a treatment, right? In the absence of an intervention, right? So that's in essence what the method we're doing here. And I think, culturomics is particularly good, I think, at creating opportunities for the use of this method in conservation, because culturomics very often has very long time series available of data, right? So it's perfect for this type of more data intensive sort of method, right? Now, in terms of what we actually did, you can see here in this figure, so we focused on 2 different campaigns. One of them was focused on the Western Ghats of India, so a biodiversity hotspot. The other one was more general, was sort of animal skits, was focused on a variety of different endangered species and sort of highlighting some of their, I guess, sort of unique ecology, behavior, so, things like that. Then we looked at a time frame based on YouTube clicks. So we looking at using data from the implementer. We looked at when I guess the treatment had the most visibility. We then looked at a series. So this was all I should have maybe said in the beginning. We focused on Wikipedia as our data set as our focus as a data source. And so we looked at then Wikipedia. One of the interesting things about it is that you can access daily counts of how many people access the different language versions of the same Wikipedia page, right? It's a very detailed, very time sort of granular data set. And so we did this data selection, then we selected our controls, and then we did this analysis comparing the values for the campaign, for the treated pages, I guess, for the pages that were featured in the campaign, and then for the ones that were related but did not feature. I'm happy to go into more detail into exactly what we mean by controls in this case, but just in the interest of time, I'll proceed. Very happy to answer questions. Now, each of the different campaigns focus on a variety of different topics. You can see the effect sizes here in this tree plot. As you can see, only a few of them were significant, so different from zero. You'll see that also we had some positive, but also a couple of negative effects, which were a little bit surprising. Although I have to say that these effect sizes you see here are before we correct for multiple hypothesis testing. And so once you correct for multiple hypothesis testing, a number of these effect sizes that are closer to zero then disappear, right? In fact, only 3 of these effect sizes survive, so to speak, after you do correction for multiple hypothesis testing, and that is the Western Ghats in Canada, the dent, the Asian elephant, I believe, and the Mrissika swamp, I think. And so I guess really one of the take homes from the entire exercise is that really very few of these topics show any increase in interest when it comes to information searching at all, right? And you can see that from these 3 plots that there was actually a high number of topics that we looked into. So overwhelmingly, we couldn't find any effect at all when it comes to information searching from these videos. Well, I should say actually that when I mean by campaign in this case, basically there were a series of YouTube videos that were released by a UK conservation charity, and they were boosted by YouTube and other types of social media advertising. That's when I talk about campaigns, that's what I mean in practice. So, wrapping up, conscious of, we have a lot of content to get through, and I think the most exciting bit is usually the questions. So I think in terms of culturomics and the synthetic control, I think there's a potential happy marriage there, in that conservation culturomics as a data source can really provide a lot of different avenues to explore the use of synthetic controls in conservation. On the other hand, we saw that baseline popularity affects measurable impact, in that the only campaigns where we could see an impact were the ones that were in regional languages, probably because with languages like English, for example, the volume is so high, the variability of page views is so high that it becomes really difficult to pick up a signal, right? So that's something else to bear in mind. And also we have this issue of the negative effects, right? So we had in particular one campaign that even after correcting for multiple hypothesis testing, we still had a negative effect. And really the only way we can explain this really would be in a case where the campaign, because it is in English, it is taking viewers away from the Wikipedia page in languages other than English, and so taking having that negative impact in that way, even if that negative impact, then it's difficult to measure on the English pages just because their volume of views is such that the signal is much harder to pick up, and so that's really the only way so far we've been able to make sense of this. But of course, we very much welcome, if there's anyone in the audience that has alternative explanations, we very much would welcome that, because it's something we're currently grappling with as we finalize our reviews, our responses to reviewers' comments, right? And so
Thank you, Diogo. I'm just aware that we are over time, so we will have questions, I think, at the end. But thank you so much for that. It was very interesting. We will move on to the next presentation, which is by Rebecca Young.
Cool, thank you. Set up my screen share. There we go. Can everyone see that okay? Perfect. Okay, cool. So thank you very much. So I'm going to be talking about the work that we did using the IUCN Green Status of Species to assess the past and the future impact of a long-term island restoration programme. And specifically, this is a programme on the island of Mauritius. And the way that we did this was we used the Green Status of Species, which is a measure of species recovery, to assess 10 different endemic species and to use this to understand the impact that conservation has had in the past and also is expected to have in the future on this island ecosystem. So I'll start with a very, very brief introduction to the green status of species for anyone who's not familiar. So it's part of the Red List and it is designed to measure species recovery. And so we do this by assessing the state of the species across its indigenous range, so where it was historically found, in various different time points. So first of all, looking at the former state, so before conservation, what was the state of the species? We assess it at the current state, so how does it look today, based on the best available data that we have. And then we also consider various hypothetical scenarios. So the first one is a counterfactual scenario. So we use qualitative and inferential approaches to determine a counterfactual current scenario. So if there'd never been any conservation, what do we expect the population of the species to look like today? And this is based on evidence such as trend data. We use expert elicitation, so working with species experts and experts in the field is a really valuable part of the assessment, and also looking at species proxies if we have them. And by comparing this counterfactual current to the actual current gives us what we call the conservation legacy, which is the past impact of conservation. We also project into the future. So in 10 years' time, if there were no conservation actions going ahead, what would we expect the status of the species to be in 10 years' time? And this change from the current tells us what we call the conservation dependence, which is how dependent species are on continued action. There are two other metrics that look at conservation gains in the future within the green status, but for the purpose of this special issue, we've really focused on these two metrics, the legacy and the dependence, because they use more of a counterfactual thought process. So to quickly give you a bit of a summary of the results. So the first thing we found was that the status of the 10 species assessed, when we combine the scores for each of those 10 species by averaging them out, we did see an improvement in their species recovery status from prior to conservation starting, which is really positive because there's been a huge amount of conservation on Mauritius, from invasive predator controls to nest boxes, supplementary feeding, species reintroductions, all kinds of actions going ahead. And we also found that when we compared this to the counterfactual, for the majority of the species assessed, the conservation legacy was given a high category. So we give them a categorization as well as a numerical score. And we have, when we aggregated the scores, this conservation legacy of going from a species recovery of about 2% if there'd been no conservation to over 15% with the current state. And this is largely driven by these 8 species, which are expected to have gone extinct in the absence of any conservation. So all of them, their counterfactual scenario was that they would be extinct. And then similarly, when we were looking forward, so this next part of the graph is looking 10 years into the future. When we considered the future without conservation, we would have expected to see some heavy declines in a decade's time with no conservation. You can see the green error bars on here are the uncertainty, because within a green status assessment, we do capture uncertainty with a sort of an upper and a lower bound estimation. So you can see there is a larger uncertainty for the future, which is expected because we're having to base it on the evidence that we have and the trends that we have. But this decline in 10 years was largely driven by the reptile species, because all of these 5 species were expected to be very close to extinct or possibly even extinct within a decade of no conservation. So that's just a very sort of rapid summary of some of the results of this work. And the green status is a really great way to assess the impacts of conservation in your field sites and to help understand the impact that work is having. So for anyone interested in completing green status assessments, there's a huge amount of resources available, including an online training course. And this slide's actually slightly out of date because those coming soon modules are now live and published. And yes, looking forward to answering your questions.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And I don't know if we'll just do Monique right at the end or we'll just carry the same order on. So next we'll have Alex.
Okay, all right. Let's see here. I will share. I will hit the share button anyway. See if it lets me share. Oh, there we go. Okay, is that showing up? Yeah, thank you. Okay, great, thank you. A bit in the spirit of Diogo, trying to evaluate something that isn't protected areas or eco-payments, as were rightly highlighted by Tanya earlier. Here, this is work led by Jimena Rico, who's a PhD student at UC Santa Barbara. Started when she was a master's student at Duke. I'm an environmental economist at Duke University. We're looking at Peruvian Amazon logging concessions and eco certifications. And for me, I'll just give the big framing for myself. I'm curious about the following question. Do limited rights for landholders always hurt forests, or could they help? For me, I'm ideally finding, the all SDG interventions that somehow are both improving conservation and also improving local livelihoods when possible. And so that, that could happen in different ways. So the particular question here is, can you even give firms extraction rights? And could that help or hurt? And if they would hurt or if they helped, would having third parties monitor, like in FSC certification, would that make a difference? So that's the question. The background for me is essentially the political economy of the protection of forest or its lack. Tropical forest losses are associated with all those sectors, as you're aware. And the dominant public response has been to reduce the right to extract. And protected areas do reduce forest loss on average, but I really think there's so many statements on average that we don't want to make. The real question is, echoing Tanya, when do they have impact and when do they not have impact? A mild positive average is not informative. And the private political economic responses suggest that reducing the right to extract may reduce profit. So there can be a tension. And I'm really interested in what conditions shift the local trade-offs. And I'm going to highlight two of them: the level of economic pressure and the state presence or non-presence on the frontier. And that introduces the sort of first element of robustness or heterogeneity that our paper is wanting to bring to the special issue. It's super important to evaluate different impacts for different contexts. And for us, different contexts will be different regions in the Peruvian Amazon. And just to talk about the extraction policies, it's in case people disagree about this, I'll say I don't think it's clear which way a logging concession would go. People who maximize short-run profit might cut more than was agreed for a logging concession, and that could hurt the forest. People maximizing long-run profits sometimes do not cut very quickly, right? You might go to some relatively old age. But I'm most confident about the third bullet here. Maximizing your own profit involves excluding other people. And I think that exclusion power is quite important. And there's also the capacity for logging concessionaires to exclude. So I think it's ambiguous whether exclusion versus sort of profit taking would raise or lower deforestation with a concession. And I also think it's ambiguous which way an FSC certification would go. It certainly only helps if people meet laws and standards and possible incentives from certification. But if everyone who signs up was pretty much the folks who already were meeting the standards, which I think is one famous story, then you wouldn't expect much impact at all. Whereas if you had greenwashing or rising demand of destructive practices, you could raise loss. So I think it's good to do empirics on these extraction and extraction monitoring policies, because I think they could go either way. And we had an initial paper which worked on average with one forest sensor and one forest outcome, and found that logging concessions certainly did not raise loss and might even be doing better than protected areas, which is a separate paper, whereas the certification was not doing anything on average. But those are, potentially controversial enough results that it seemed a good topic to ask Tanya about in terms of exploring robustness and heterogeneity for these impacts. And that's the theme of our paper. So we're going to be making use of longer panels of forest data, echoing Diogo's point about the value of having long data sets, and using different estimators. And here we're just saying, there's a lot of people doing a lot of work to whom we are grateful, generating awesome forest data sets and awesome new statistical tools. And for the new folks coming into the area, a lot of them are quite available. both the data and the tools, and folks can pretty quickly help you get up to speed on using them. So I would say these things are not out of reach of anyone who wants to try such research. And the new tools will help you reduce biases from different impacts. We don't have a lot of time to talk about technique here. And they also, just on the easy side, a nice, easy pictures and tests of, did you qualify to be able to infer causal impact, as Tanya highlighted. So I think the tools are helpful. I'll just preview where we go here, because Tanya will probably cut me off appropriately at the 5-minute part. So what the preview from our shifting of forest sensors, forest outcomes, and forest contacts. With the new sensors, the different forest data, we confirmed pretty robustly that the logging concessions did not raise loss. If anything, they lowered forest loss. So a right to cut, if anything, lowered losses relative to untreated forests with no policy. From going to a new outcome, one of the data sets has degradation as well as deforestation. And we think that could be really helpful. In fact, we really thought it would be helpful for certification, because maybe certification would, there'd be some change, but really it would be limiting how much forest would change. So for the concessions, though, before the certification, if it was lowering anything, it was lowering the shift from degradation to deforestation. So degradation didn't change that much, but that last conversion to what was measured deforestation appeared to be where the concessions could, if anything, have a benefit for forest. And then looking across contexts, where did that happen across these three regions? It happened in the higher pressure region. And in general, the Peruvian Amazon is a relatively low pressure region, and pressure is an incredibly important context. If there's no pressure, there's really nothing to be blocked, and a policy can't do very much. So where this ability to exclude of the concessions mattered was in the higher pressure place. Then for certification, it turns out it did not help, even with avoiding degradation. So that was just a confirmation. I don't know how much time I have, but we'll just, those are pictures, those things. It's just to show things like what Diogo showed. I'll just say the matching tools are, he was using synthetic control. This is, that's for low end treatments. This is just straight up matching. The one thing I'll say is that I started long ago, following, I think, work Paul was doing, and then with Paul, I think he's on the call, trying to match on characteristics like distance to city or distance to road. And that was wonderful compared to not being able to do that. And that's in B above here, but it doesn't help a lot here. Whereas matching on pre-treatment outcomes, like what happened in the past for deforestation, has, I think, proven very helpful and is analogous to what Diogo showed. So that's C there, and you can see the fit is far better in C. That's from our prior paper. That matching
Alex,
is,
sorry, I am going to
send.
have to
Perfect.
ask you to wrap
Time
it
to
up.
end. We'll take up more such lovely pictures later. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I didn't mean so quickly. I thought you'd say a few more words, but that's fine.
Oh,
Great,
okay.
thank you.
You tell me.
No, it's fine.
Fine.
Alex, what can happen is people can ask questions,
Yeah,
and
of
you
course.
can come back to these
No,
slides
perfect.
after.
Thank
Thank you so much. And we will now move to Monique for the last presentation.
Hi. You see my screen now? You see my screen?
Yes.
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 Great, fantastic. Okay, I'm really sorry about that. I'm going to talk about the evaluator's dilemma, and I'm going to. Sorry, I don't think you've got the full screen, have you? Yeah, you've got the full screen now, right? Yes. So I'd like to first introduce you to my great group of co-authors on this paper. And thanks to Tanya for giving us an opportunity to preview this paper. I'm going to introduce you to Savannas Forever, to the specific case study that prompted this idea of the evaluator's dilemma, and to the tools that we use to try to mitigate some of the problems. Savannas Forever is a M&E organization based in northern Tanzania. And although I'm not going to talk about it today, one of our objectives early on was to coordinate real-time, participant-driven feedback on ongoing interventions to supplement the conventional sort of baseline and endline studies that are done. It didn't work, and I'd love to get ideas from people about how that could be done more effectively. But I'll move on to what our paper's about, which is we were asked to evaluate a project done by the Northern Tanzania Rangeland Initiative, which is a consortium of 10 different NGOs led by the TNC, and the project was funded by USAID. And we were asked specifically at Savannas Forever to identify the key factors that contribute to successful community-led range management in northern Tanzania. But there's a big but. Halfway through the 5-year project, all but one of the target villages were replaced. Second, so we had no baseline data. Secondly, we were given inadequate resources to conduct any research in control communities or to be able to develop counterfactuals. And thirdly, the intervention itself was highly heterogeneous because of the 10 different partners and played out across a highly heterogeneous social and ecological context. So this is why we started talking about the evaluator's dilemma. What were we going to do? And we believe that this is very general, and it really results from the M&E team not being involved in the design of the intervention or the design of the analytical strategy. So we decided to introduce 2 tools. The first is directed acyclic graphs. And the goal here is that we believe that these allowed us to identify from this causal salad the relationship between the primary hypothesized mediator of project success, which is good governance, that's the theta gov, and a healthy rangeland outcome, that's the theta out. And the DAG would allow us to do this, to zoom in on that purple arrow and get some control over confounding factors, over the sorts of biases that come when you have a study like this with access to rather limited data, and to the kinds of backdoor effects which are associated with sample selection. So we know that DAGs have been used very effectively by some people who are indeed on this call. But what we're arguing here is that we're demonstrating their utility in identifying a suitable analytical strategy given limited data and a compromised study design from the point of view of the evaluating partner. The second tool that we introduce is item response theory. And this allows for a principled aggregation of the complex, messy empirical data that you often have when you're trapped in an evaluator's dilemma. And it allows an aggregation of different measures. We actually had measures across lots of the diagnostic framework measures. And it allows you to aggregate them in terms of, weight them in terms of both their importance and their discriminative ability in predicting the outcomes that you're interested in. And so using these 2 approaches, this was the result that we find, which is not surprising, but the effectiveness of the governance or the quality of the governance process on the x-axis there is associated with on the y-axis is the community evaluation of the quality of the rangeland, or in the bottom graph, satellite imagery measure of the amount of bare land. So the questions I'd like to leave everybody with, the first is real-time participant-based feedback possible? Is it something that we could develop more systematically to complement more standard M&E methodologies? Secondly, how general is the evaluator's dilemma? Was our situation particularly bad, or do many people face these kinds of problems? And third, if you get a chance to read our paper, we'd like to know if our tools are helpful. Thanks very much. Stop sharing.
Thank you. I think we now pass on to Elias. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you very much. That were very exciting short snippets of your research. Regarding that, I would maybe also agree with Tanya. We could do more of an overarching questions that each of you can answer. And with respect to that, maybe you can answer what would be your top actionable insight from your research that practitioners can take home about how to integrate impact evaluation into their practices. Maybe we do a quick round among the panelists. So what is the actionable thing that you would tell a practitioner now how to implement these research into practice?
I'm happy to go first. Yes, so for ours, one way is that people can use it is to do green status of species evaluations. So as I said, it's really vital to have people who are actually working on the species in the field, contributing to these assessments and leading on the assessments. So we've got lots of resources within the Red List unit and on the Red List website. So if people are interested, then that's a great way because you can really get some good insights into what has and hasn't worked in different sites for different species.
Great. Diogo, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Elias. So on my end, I think it has to do with whether, considering carefully whether you're biting off more than you can chew, right? So there's always a temptation in these campaigns, particularly if you're online, to always think about the biggest possible audience you can reach, where is the biggest possible, prize, right? And I think one thing we see is that I think rather perhaps obviously, but still, if you're targeting a very big audience, you need a very big effort, and even measuring and detecting that impact is going to be much, much harder, right? And so just scaling the effort that you're going to put in place with, what's realistically possible, you can possibly achieve. I think that's something that's worth bearing in mind.
Yeah. Monique, you wanted to go next?
Sure, yes.
I think involving the partners of the intervention involving the monitoring and evaluation team from the very beginning is absolutely critical. I know it's been said 100 times, but we found ourselves always at Savannas Forever brought in at the very end saying, hey, we need an evaluation, we don't have much money, could you do it quickly? And we know that it ends up on a shelf somewhere, and it's incredibly frustrating. And secondly, I would really like to push for this idea that the communities who are, I mean, using a bad word, but the communities who are the targets effectively of the intervention have real-time feedback to say what is happening, whether it's working properly or not. I know that's not the only source of evaluation, but I think we absolutely need to have those channels open. And I wish that the partners we worked with were more open to that idea.
Right. Alex, maybe you can also take up Porfiro's question that you already commented and
Right.
how you yes.
I'll build my answer off the two really good comments or questions in the chat. First, Paul suggested, I'm going to put this a particular way, that we think, and let me step back. I love doing a good evaluation, but it's sad to do an evaluation and find nothing when a little bit of prior thought could have probably guessed that it was going to be no impact, and we could have designed off of the knowledge we have from the past, both the local knowledge of the actor and knowledge from past impact evaluations. So let me translate that to Paul, I think, saying maybe we should have some a priori reasons or theory or common sense or logic about where we would expect impacts to be higher or lower, which contexts could affect impact. And I completely agree with that. I think that's important for design. Where do we target? Where do we think we will have impact? But it also matters for rigorous, not just pure data mining evaluation, that we assess the impacts in places that a priori we would think in a robust and relevant way for other places in the world could differ. And then I'll say, whereas I said, I think many people can pick up these tools, and I really do think that's true. I appreciate Rachel's comment that, if you haven't had this background, just wandering in and grabbing things might be hard. So that partnering between people who do this and people who implement projects is a good idea. I'll just hedge on that answer and say, I think that partnering can very easily be training and handing it on. In fact, it's a little bit interesting because, I was once talking with Sheila about, doing a project together and doing some evaluation. And very quickly after we walked through something together, folks in her group, were happily able to do that. So I think partnering is a great idea, Rachel. Thank you. But also that can be training where people head off and quickly make use of the tools, even while staying in touch. So sorry, that's a very long answer.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. I mean, there were some technical questions along the way also, right? But maybe to keep up with that, right? To what extent do you think that your research is, if you don't find anything, right, Diogo or Alex, right, if you don't find significant results, how much is it because there's such a strong targeting and selection in where to place the interventions? And even then, right, what should practitioners then learn from it? To search for more pressured areas then, or search for which dimensions to look for? Do we need then rather a modeling approach here, where to target and where to find better outcomes?
So was that just for me or for everybody?
For everybody, I guess. I guess
Please,
also
yeah.
Becca knows
Yeah.
how it goes, right?
No, exactly. I'll let other folks go first again.
Please. Like, yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Diego.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Okay.
Oh, I was just going to say, within a green status assessment, we do sometimes get where, because it's not so much testing interventions, it's trying to just understand the situation as it is. So we do sometimes get instances where we don't see a change. Maybe once we've gone through all the stages of the assessment, people might have thought they'd see more of a change than they do. And it's just a case of really sort of understanding what has been done, and making sure it is sort of a realistic picture of species recovery, because kind of the reality is small targeted interventions may have a big impact at a site, but not at the global species level. So that's something that comes up quite often, I would say, that where we're not seeing results, it's often because it's just not at that global scale. And all of the green status assessments at the moment are at the global scale, although we are currently waiting for the review on a paper of looking at it at the program scale, which will be another way that people could assess whether their specific programs are having an impact and kind of contributing to the global recovery.
Diego, to comment on that?
Yeah, no, just not to Elias, to your point. I think in any practitioner sort of setting, finding significant results or no change, it's always a little bit challenging. It's always a little bit challenging to communicate that, internally, for people to digest, that what inevitably has been a big collective effort. In the grand scheme of things, we couldn't find evidence for a change. So that's certainly a bigger, that's certainly a broader issue. Certainly I've come across quite a bit. It's always a challenge. In terms of what we take away from it, in danger of repeating myself, but I think there really is an issue of, in terms of strategy, often organizations thinking, oh, we have this $30,000 or whatever we have, and we're going to change the world with this, as opposed to being really sort of targeted and really precise and specific about what is it that we can achieve with the effort that we're going to put into place. And then of course it if you think about it in that way, and then it's not surprising then you don't see these effects in place, right? So I think it really is about being a little bit more I think, realistic often. And I'm coming from a place, just to be completely clear. So my work is a lot on the sort of behavior change space. So I deal a lot with, what Paul has rightly highlighted with, in the chat, interventions that I think in theory would expect to have small effect sizes anyway. So I think it becomes even more important to be, realistic about what can be achieved.
And I just answer very briefly. I think if we don't find effects, we need to be absolutely honest about it. I think there's a lot of suspicion that only positive results are supported, and we need to be transparent and report. And when we think about it more deeply, I think questions of scale are critical. We've not in the work I was talking about, but in other work in Pemba, we've been looking at perceptions of environmental change and how the community's perceptions differ from those done by satellite imagery of changes in forestry. And I think understanding those differences is really important, not just for evaluation, but also for implementation, because communities will change their behavior towards the forest depending on the status that they see it in, whether it's declining, whether it's being threatened by outsiders or insiders. So I think we can turn what might seem like a bug into a feature and say no significant effect actually might mean there's all kinds of interesting things going on at different scales that we need to pursue further.
Alex, please.
Yeah. Once again, Chat Nation has provided my answers. I appreciate that. I would say that it is very important to consider whether there's pressure or not now. At the very least, for Elias's question, to explain why it might not be surprising if there's no impact. So I think we need to report when there's no impact, and pressure and context are extremely important reason, in my view, why that happens. And I was going to already say, but Rachel has taken it up again kindly. Thank you again. I agree with her that doesn't inherently mean that you should not go to a low pressured place to establish something you think will have impact in the future. There's trade-offs, right? Maybe a small effect on your favorite species is better than a large effect on a less valued one. Perhaps there's a comment from, I can't see it, it popped away from the title, I think it was Ash, on this short run and long run. And you might not expect to measure an impact in the short run, but it might be there in the long run. So I think there's a lot of reasons why different organizations will use pressure differently. But at the very least, we want to acknowledge that a priori and in every result I've ever seen, it makes a big difference for the short run impacts, and we should build that into our design, even if we consciously make other decisions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for all your questions. I know that there are some more technical questions on the chat. Maybe you still have time to answer them, or otherwise, please go for it and email them to the speakers or to me. Yes. So I would like to wrap up and hand over back to Tanya.
I'll actually take over for Sheila here. Yeah, I just want to thank all of our speakers. I know you had a very limited amount of time to share some previews of your papers, but we're very much looking forward to the special issue in Conservation Science and Practice that will hopefully be out in March, but please everyone stay tuned. Thank you all for attending this final seminar of 2024 for the Tuesdays with Team Counterfactual. We will take a short break for January and return on the 4th of February. Please check our webpage for the announcement of that speaker. And if you need anything in the meantime, I will share our Team Counterfactual Gmail in the chat that you can get a hold of us. We will also be sharing the chat with the speakers so they can see any additional questions that we might not have been able to answer. All right. Thank you, everyone.